Dolly Parton spent nearly 60 years hiding one huge part of her life from the public, her marriage. While millions knew everything about Dolly, her husband Carl Dean stayed so hidden that some people questioned whether he even existed. But after losing him, Dolly is finally opening up about the life they kept secret and why she protected it for so long. For almost 60 years, Dolly Parton and Carl Dean lived two completely different lives. Dolly became one of the most recognizable women in America. Her face was everywhere, her music reached millions, and eventually her name would sit above the gates of her own theme park. Carl wanted none of it. He stayed away from cameras, avoided red carpets, and built a life that existed almost completely outside his wife's fame. He could even walk through Dollywood, buy his own ticket, and spend the day among thousands of Dolly Parton fans without anyone realizing who he was. That was the strange balance they somehow maintained for decades. Dolly belonged to the world, but the life she shared with Carl belonged only to them. To understand any of it, you have to go back a long way. Back before the wigs and the #1 records, before the laundromat where they met, before the Greyhound bus that carried an 18-year-old girl out of the mountains with a cardboard suitcase and a head full of songs. You have to go all the way back to a one-room cabin on the banks of a river called the Little Pigeon, in a stretch of the Great Smoky Mountains where the winters bit and the money never came, and where a poor family with too many children was about to have one more. She was born on the 19th of January, 1946, the fourth of what would eventually be 12 children born to Lee and Avie Lee Parton. The cabin sat far up in Sevier County, so far up that when Avie Lee's labor turned dangerous, the only doctor who could reach her had to ride through a snowstorm to get there. His name was Robert F. Thomas, a missionary physician who spent his life carrying medicine into hollows the rest of the country had forgotten. He saved mother and baby that night. Lee Parton, who had no money to pay him, handed the doctor a sack of cornmeal. It was all he had. Dolly has told that story her whole life, and she always tells it with a grin, because she learned early that if you are going to be poor, you might as well be funny about it. She says she was bought and paid for with a bag of cornmeal, and that she has been raking in the dough ever since. It is a good joke. It is also underneath the first fact about her that matters. She came into the world already a debt her family could barely cover, in a place where a full stomach was an achievement, and a doctor was a luxury paid for in food. Try to see the house itself. Not the version on a Christmas card, but the real one on Locust Ridge. 2 rooms, sometimes described as one, holding a family that kept growing. No electricity, no running water, no plumbing of any kind. Water came from a creek carried in by hand. Baths came in the river in summer, and in winter from a single pan of water shared around. When the wind came through the walls, and it always came through the walls, they stuffed the cracks with newspaper and pasted more of it up as insulation so that a child lying awake could read scraps of yesterday's news by the light of the fire. The children slept jammed together for warmth, 3 and 4 to a bed, and the little ones were not always dry, and the cold did not care. Dolly has never sanded that down into something pretty. She has talked about waking on the worst mornings with the wet frozen against her skin. She has talked about a storm so hard that the family boarded up the windows against the snow and then found themselves trapped inside with almost no fire and almost no food, so cold that tears froze on their faces, all of them huddled and praying, sure this was the night they would not wake up. They did wake up. She has called it a kind of Christmas miracle. What she means is that they lived, and that surviving felt like a gift instead of a right. Picture that night in the cabin, the windows boarded against a storm that wanted in, a dozen children and 2 exhausted parents pressed together in the last of the warmth, the fire almost gone, the food almost gone, the cold pressing through the newspaper in the wall, and Avie Lee, who had nothing left to give her children but words and faith, holding them all together with prayer, because prayer was free and hope was free, and they were down to the free things. A child who lives through a night like that learns something the comfortable never learn, that survival is not guaranteed, that the line between making it and not making it can be as thin as a shift in the weather, and that when you come out the other side alive, you owe somebody a thank you. She has thanked God every day of her life since. She has also, every day of her life since, made very sure she was never cold or hungry or in the dark again, and made sure, through the books and the disaster funds and the quiet checks written to strangers, that as many other people as she could reach would never have to be either. Food was whatever the land would give, and whatever a man could catch. Corn ground into meal, tobacco in the field, a hog if they were lucky, and past that, whatever ran through the woods, rabbit and squirrel and groundhog, and on a hard season even bear. Dolly has said it plainly, that they ate whatever was running around out there, because the other choice was not eating. There is no shame in it in her telling, and no bitterness either. There is just the flat truth of a table where nothing was wasted, because there was never enough to waste. Faith held that house together, as surely as the walls did. They were church people, mountain Pentecostals, and the family sang in church from the time the children could stand. So that for Dolly, the line between a hymn and a song and a prayer was never very clear, and never needed to be. Her grandfather on her mother's side was a preacher who played the fiddle and wrote his own songs, and something of him ran straight down into her. The same mix of the holy and the homemade, the same certainty that music was a way of talking to God and to your neighbors at the same time. She has carried that faith her whole life, unshowy and unshakable, through the gun on the stairs and the surgeries and every grave she has stood over. It is the one thing about her that has never been a construction. The wig is a wig. The belief is real. The house itself was a small ocean of children, and in an ocean that size a child can drown for lack of notice. The older girls became second mothers to the younger ones out of pure necessity, cooking and minding and carrying babies on their hips, while their own mother's strength gave out. There was love in it, and there was also a hard truth every one of those children learned early, which is that in a family of 12, love has to be divided 12 ways, and a child who wants more than her share has to find a way to earn it. Some of the Parton children earned it by being good, or useful, or quiet. Dolly earned it by being unforgettable. She would climb up on the porch and sing, and the babies would stop crying, and the grown-ups would stop working, and for a few minutes, every eye in that crowded, hungry house would be on her. She had found the thing that stopped a room. She would spend the rest of her life doing it on bigger and bigger porches. Now, a child raised like that could come out one of two ways. She could learn that the world is a locked door and shrink to fit the small life she was handed. Or she could look at that cabin, at the 11 brothers and sisters, at the feed sack dresses and the shared pan of water, and decide that whatever glittering thing existed beyond the ridge, she was going to have it. Dolly went the second way, but the ache that sent her out the door was never really about money. It was about being seen at all. Think about what it means to be the fourth of 12. There is no lap that is only yours. There is no plate that is only yours. Attention in that house was the rarest thing of all, rarer than money, rarer than heat. And Dolly figured out young that there was one way to get a room full of Partons to stop and look at you. You could make something. You could sing. You could tell a story so good that even the babies went quiet. Her mother gave her the raw material for that, without ever knowing it would build an empire. Avie Lee Owens came from a musical line, the daughter of a Pentecostal preacher who played the fiddle and wrote his own songs. She filled that cold cabin with old mountain ballads and church hymns and songs, carried over from the old country by people long dead, and she sang them while she worked, worn thin by too many pregnancies and too little rest. Her health was fragile. There were winters when she seemed to sink into herself, present in body and gone somewhere else in spirit, so that the older girls, especially the eldest, Willadine, had to become mothers to the younger ones. But even at her lowest, Avie Lee sang, and a small daughter, hungry for her mother's attention, learned that a song was a way to reach her. Her father gave her something different and just as lasting. Lee Parton could not read. He had gone into the fields as a boy to help feed his own family, and never got the schooling, and that closed doors on him his whole life. Doors he was more than smart enough to walk through if only they had opened. Dolly has always been careful, fierce even, about how she talks about her daddy. She will not let anyone mistake illiterate for stupid. He was, she says, one of the smartest men she ever knew, a shrewd horse trader who could size up a deal in a glance, a man whose mind ran quick even, though the world had told him it did not count. She got her business sense from him. Years later, when she started giving away millions of free books to children so that no other child would grow up ashamed of what he could not read, everyone assumed it was charity. It was that. It was also a daughter still trying to open a door for her father long after he was gone. So the pieces were already there in that cabin. The mother's music, the father's shrewdness, the hunger to be seen, and running under all of it, a stubborn streak that would not quit no matter how hard the life pressed down. You can watch it show up in her first real memories. There was the doll. Before there was a guitar. Before there was a stage. There was a corncob that her father dressed up into a toy for a little girl who had no toys. He burned 2 eyes into the cob with a hot poker. Avie Lee gave it hair of corn silk and a dress of husks. And Dolly loved that homemade thing so fiercely that she wrote a song about it, her first, at around 5 years old, before she could spell her own name. She called it Little Tiny Tassel Top. A child with nothing looked at a corncob and heard a melody in it. That is the whole engine of her life, right there, in a toy made of trash. Because that is the word that keeps coming up in her childhood. And it is the word we have to sit with to understand everything that came after. Trash, rags, the look people gave a Parton child in town. It came to a head over a coat. One winter, someone gave the family a box of fabric scraps, and Avie Lee, who could make something out of anything, decided to sew her daughter a coat out of the pieces. As she stitched the mismatched rags together, she told Dolly the Bible story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, the boy whose father loved him so much. He made him a coat brighter than all his brothers. By the time the coat was finished, Dolly did not see rags. She saw a coat made just for her, stitched with a story, and she wore it to school proud as a queen. The other children saw exactly what it was. A poor girl in a coat made of scraps. They laughed, they pointed at the seams, and when she insisted, the way a child insists on the one beautiful thing she owns, that the coat was special, that her mama had sewn love into every patch, the teasing turned mean. Some of the children shoved her into a coat closet and held the door shut and left her there in the dark. She was little, she was terrified, and that closet did something to her that lasted the rest of her life. To this day, she is afraid of the dark. To this day, she sleeps with a light on. Sit with that a moment, because it explains more than any other single thing about the woman she became, the girl who would grow up to be the brightest, most lit up, most rhinestone figure in American music, the woman who never met a sequin she did not like, once got locked in the dark for the crime of loving something poor and calling it beautiful. She spent the rest of her life making sure she was never in the dark again, and never small again, and never overlooked again. The lights were not vanity. The lights were the opposite of that closet. And here is the part that tells you who she is. She took the worst day of her childhood and turned it into her favorite song. Years later, she wrote Coat of Many Colors, the story of that coat, and that mockery and that mother's love. And she has called it the song she is proudest of out of the thousands she has written. She did not write it to get even. She wrote it to say that the children were wrong, that the coat really was special, that a family with no money can be rich in the things money cannot buy. She was still standing up for that little girl in the closet. She always would be. Years later, she made a whole television movie out of that one memory, so that families all over the country could sit in their living rooms and watch a poor mountain girl get laughed at for a coat made of rags, and then watch her mother's love turn the rags into something holy. She put her worst day on national television on purpose, dressed it in a Bible story, and handed it to every child who had ever been mocked for being poor. That is a strange and beautiful kind of revenge, the only kind she has ever gone in for. She did not get even with the children who locked her in the dark. She outlived them, outloved them, and turned the moment they tried to shame her into the thing she is proudest of, in a life full of things to be proud of. The closet was supposed to teach her that she was small. Instead, it taught her exactly how big she was willing to become. There is more pain in those early years, more than a smile can quite cover. Around 6 or 7, she was climbing a fence when she came down on a broken mason jar and nearly cut several toes clean off her right foot. There was no money for a hospital, no car to get to one anyway, so the family did what mountain families did. They held the child down. Avie Lee packed the wounds with cornmeal to stop the bleeding, poured kerosene over them for want of any other antiseptic, and sewed her daughter's toes back on with a quilting needle. The toes healed. Think of the nerve that takes in a mother and in a child both, and think of what it teaches you about pain, that it is something you get through, because there is no one coming to spare you from it. And then there was Larry. In the summer of 1955, when Dolly was 9, her mother was pregnant again, and this time she had made her 4th daughter a promise. This baby, Avie Lee said, would be Dolly's baby, hers to help raise, hers to care for through the nights. Dolly took it to heart the way Only a lonely child in a crowded house could. She sang to her mother's belly. She talked to the baby that was coming, already loving him, already his. His name was Larry. He lived 4 days. Avi Lee had been sick during the pregnancy, and some in the family say she knew, the way mothers sometimes know, that the child would not stay. When he died, the grief landed on a 9-year-old girl who had been told this was her baby, and she carried a guilt no child should carry, a sense that she had failed at the one job she had been given. She has spoken about it since as one of the deep wounds of her life, the first time death walked into her small world and took something that was supposed to be hers to protect. She was 9 and she had already lost a child. In a way, she never stopped being the girl who was handed a baby to love and then had him taken away. Keep Larry in mind. He comes back into this story decades later in a hospital, in the worst year of her life, when a grown woman learns she will never have a baby of her own. But we are getting ahead, because for all the hardship, Dolly has been stubborn about one thing her entire life. She will not let you call her childhood only sad. Poor, yes. Hard, yes. Cold and hungry and frightening, yes. But she says over and over that they were rich in the things money cannot buy. Love and faith and kindness and understanding. And that she did not even know she was poor until people from outside came in and told her so. That is the strange gift of Locust Ridge. It gave her a bottomless drive to escape it. And at the very same time, it gave her a home she was proud of, a set of people she would defend to her last breath. She wanted out. She never wanted to be from anywhere else. And somewhere in all of this, a little girl started building the mask she would wear for the rest of her life. This part she has told so many times in so many places that it has almost stopped sounding shocking, and we should slow down and let it be shocking again. There was a woman in town. Sevierville was small, and everyone knew everyone, and everyone had opinions. And the opinions about this particular woman were not kind. She wore her hair piled high and bleached the color of straw. She painted her lips and her nails bright red. She wore skirts too short and tops too low and heels too high. And the story goes, she even had little novelty touches in those heels. Plastic goldfish swimming in the clear plastic. The good people of the town had a word for her, and it was not a nice word. They called her trash. They called her the town tramp. And little Dolly Parton, coming into town from a cabin with newspaper in the walls, looked at this woman and thought she was the most beautiful creature she had ever seen in her life. Not in spite of the paint and the hair and the heels. Because of them, here was a woman who had decided, in a place that had nothing, to be loud and bright and unmissable. And Dolly's whole, starved for attention heart went out to her like a magnet. When the grown-ups sneered and said that woman was trash, Dolly made a quiet decision that shaped the rest of her life. If that is what trash looks like, she thought, then that is what I want to be. There is no villain in that story. Not the town, not the woman. The town was poor and scared and clinging to respectability, because respectability was the only wealth it had. And the woman was somebody the town decided to look down on so it could feel taller. But a child saw past all of it to something true. That woman had made herself into a person you could not ignore, in a world designed to ignore people like her. Dolly took that as a promise and a plan. She would outpaint them all. She would build a look so bright it could not be locked in a closet. Her whole famous image, the wigs and the nails and the impossible glamour, was born right there, in a poor girl's love for a woman the town threw away. It got her in trouble at home, of course. Her grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher, and when he caught her in tight clothes and makeup, he whipped her for it. She kept doing it anyway. Before she had a dime for real cosmetics, she improvised, the way she had learned to improvise everything. She stained her lips with crushed pokeberries and with the red of mercurochrome from the medicine shelf. She burned matchsticks and used the char to darken her eyebrows and line her eyes. She dabbed honeysuckle behind her ears for perfume. Out of the woods and the medicine cabinet, a child was building a face. She has called what she made a country girl's idea of glam. And later, once she could laugh at it, backwoods Barbie. Too much hair, too much makeup, too much of everything on purpose, always on purpose. Now hold both of those pictures at the same time, because the whole woman lives in the space between them. On one side, a girl who learned to make herself as bright and loud and seen as a human being can be, because being seen was survival. On the other side, that same girl carrying a private grief she showed almost no one. A dead baby brother, a family she guarded, a fear of the dark she hid behind a nightlight. Bright on the outside, locked tight on the inside. Remember that shape. It is the shape of the whole marriage that is coming. It is the shape of the whole secret. The talent showed up almost before anything else. She was writing songs, she says, before she could really write words, hearing melodies in the wind and the creek, and the sounds of that noisy house. By 7, she had a guitar of a kind, cobbled together out of an old broken mandolin and some found strings. Her uncle Bill Owens, her mother's brother and a musician himself, was the first grown-up outside the family to look at this odd, driven little girl and see something real. He bought her a proper child-sized Martin guitar when she was around 8. He started carrying her down out of the mountains to sing on the radio. By 10, she was a regular on Knoxville radio and television, singing on a man named Cass Walker's farm and home hour for a few dollars a show. A small child in a big hairdo, belting out songs like a woman 3 times her age. At 11, she wrote a song called Puppy Love. At 13, she rode a bus all the way to a little label in Louisiana to record it. And that same restless year, she talked her way into the biggest stage in country music. She marched up to Johnny Cash backstage at the Grand Ole Opry and told the man, flat out, that she just had to sing on the show. Something about the nerve of her made Cash laugh and say yes. He introduced her himself. The crowd would not let her leave. They called her back for encore after encore. This teenager from a cabin with no electricity, standing in the lights she had wanted her whole short life. You can see the shape of everything to come in that one moment. The talent, yes, but more than the talent, the sheer will. Nobody handed Dolly Parton the Opry. She walked up and asked for it. And that is the thing to hold on to as we come to the day her real life began. Because the same girl who walked up to Johnny Cash and demanded a stage was, within a few years, going to walk out of a laundromat and meet the one man in the world she would spend the rest of her life, keeping off of every stage she ever stood on. She was the first person in her immediate family to finish high school, graduating in 1964. At the graduation, when each senior was asked to say what they meant to do with their lives, Dolly stood up and announced to the whole room that she was going to Nashville to become a star. The room laughed. Country people did not say such things out loud, and a Parton girl saying it was almost funny, given where the Partons came from. She stood there and let them laugh. She has said the ambition burned inside her, that it was something she knew would carry her out of the mountains, that she could feel whole worlds waiting past the Smokies. She was not guessing, she knew. Think about the nerve of it. She was leaving the only world she had ever known, a world of family and faith and mountains, for a city where she knew almost no one, and no one was waiting, carrying everything she owned in a suitcase made of cardboard. She was leaving behind the bed shared for warmth, the frozen Christmases, the coat of many colors, the grave of a baby brother, the whole crowded, hungry, singing house that had made her. And she was doing it alone, at 18, on the strength of nothing but a belief that the songs in her head were worth more than the ridicule of a graduating class. Most people spend their whole lives waiting for a certainty like that and never feel it once. She felt it at 18, on a bus, watching the Smokies get smaller in the window, riding toward a life that did not yet exist because she had decided it would. The next morning, she got on a Greyhound bus with a cardboard suitcase, her guitar, and her songs, and she rode out of the only world she had ever known toward a city where nobody was waiting for her. She was 18 years old, and on her very first day in Nashville, before she had unpacked, before she had sung a note for anyone who mattered, she did the most ordinary thing in the world. She went to do her laundry. The place was called the Wishy-Washy Laundromat. She had arrived in the city with a suitcase full of dirty clothes because she had left home in such a hurry to chase the rest of her life that she had not stopped to wash a thing. So there she was, an 18-year-old with big blonde hair and a small-town accent, standing outside a Nashville laundromat on the first morning of her new life, waiting on her wash. And a young man drove by and saw her. His name was Carl Dean. He was 21, back home from the army, and he ran asphalt, laying down the black roads that other people drove on and never thought about. He was tall and lean and quiet, the kind of man who did his talking with his hands and his work. He slowed down, he talked to her, and Dolly, who by then had spent years being looked at by men in a way that made her want to cross her arms, noticed something about the way this one looked at her. He looked at her face. He talked to her like she was a person and not a shape. She has said that this almost never happened to her, and that it stopped her cold. There is a hard little irony buried in that first morning, and it is worth pausing on. She had spent years building a body men could not stop staring at, patterning herself after a woman the town called trash precisely because that woman refused to be ignored. She had wanted to be looked at, and she had gotten exactly what she wanted, which meant that by 18, she was already tired of the particular way men looked at her, tired of being a shape before she was a person, tired of eyes that never quite reached her face. So when a lanky young man outside a laundromat did the simplest thing in the world, met her eyes and talked to her like she had a mind, it undid her a little. The most looked-at girl in Nashville had finally been seen, on her very first day in the city, by a man who did not seem to care about the thing everyone else cared about. She would build a whole life around that difference. She would spend it being stared at by millions and seen, all the way down by one. And she knew from that first morning which of the two she could not live without. Carl, for his part, would later say that the very first thought that crossed his mind, watching this girl outside the laundromat, was that he was going to marry her. Not date her, marry her. He was a plain-spoken man who did not throw words around, and that is the one romantic thing he seems to have said out loud in his entire life. And he said it to himself before he ever knew her name. They started seeing each other, and it was slow and it was quiet, which suited him, and it turned out, suited a part of her that nobody in Nashville was allowed to see. He went back into the Army for a stretch, serving stateside during the Vietnam years, and they wrote and waited, and a strange thing settled between the loud, blazing, ambitious girl who wanted the whole world to look at her, and the still, private man who wanted no one to look at him at all. They were opposites down to the ground. That was the secret of it. That was always going to be the secret of it. Her record label did not want her to marry. She was a rising thing, a pretty young singer with a future, and the men who ran her career worried that a wedding ring would cool the fantasy and slow the climb. It was the oldest advice in the business, and it was not entirely wrong as business advice. Dolly listened, and then she did what she always did with advice she did not like. She smiled and she ignored it. On the 30th of May, 1966, Memorial Day, Dolly and Carl slipped across the state line into Ringgold, Georgia, to a little Baptist church, and got married where no Nashville newspaper would think to look. They eloped on purpose to keep it out of the papers, the first act of a lifelong practice of keeping the most important things out of the papers. There were almost no witnesses. The preacher, the preacher's wife, and Avie Lee, Dolly's mother, who stood up for her daughter and also took the photographs, because there was no one else to do it. Dolly wore a simple white dress her mother had made. She carried a small bouquet and a Bible. She kept her own name for the stage, Dolly Parton, the name she had already made a little famous. But on the papers that day, she signed herself Dolly Parton Dean. She was 19, he was 21, and they had just begun a marriage that would last until his death, almost 60 years later, one of the longest and least visible marriages in the whole history of American fame. Look closely at the choices they made on that wedding day, because every one of them was a small rehearsal for the 60 years to come. They did not marry in Nashville, where a reporter might catch wind of it. They crossed a state line into Georgia to a church nobody would think to watch, so that the news would break on their terms or not at all. There were no crowds, no press, no famous faces. There was a preacher and the preacher's wife, and a mother standing in for the whole family, and doubling as the photographer, because a private wedding meant there was no one else to hold the camera. The bride wore a dress her mother's hands had made, the way her coat had once been made by those same hands, and she carried a small bouquet and a Bible. It was, in every detail, the opposite of the spectacle her public life would become. And that was the point. On the very first day, before there were #1 records or movie roles or a name over a theme park gate, she was already building the wall between the two halves of her life. The label had begged her to wait afraid a husband would cost her the fantasy that sold records. She married him in secret and kept the fantasy and the husband both on opposite sides of a wall she would guard for the rest of her life. It did not take long for Carl to make his one rule clear, and he made it kindly, and he made it once, and he never had to make it again. Not long after the wedding, he put on a suit and went with his wife to a music industry awards dinner, a BMI event, the kind of evening where the business hands out trophies and everyone watches everyone. He hated every minute of it. He sat there miserable through the speeches and the flashbulbs and the small talk, a man who laid roads for a living, surrounded by people who lived on being seen. On the drive home, he told her the truth. He loved her. He was proud of her. He would stand behind her career all the way, with everything he had. But he was never going to another one of these. Not ever. And she should not ask him to. She never did. He kept that promise for the rest of his life. In nearly 60 years he attended, near as anyone can tell, almost nothing. No red carpets, no awards shows, no premieres. He gave one real public statement in all those decades, a short one, for their 50th anniversary. He avoided cameras the way other men avoid trouble. And Dolly, instead of resenting it, built her entire private life around protecting it. She has explained him again and again, always with tenderness. He was a quiet, reserved loner, she says, and he understood something she understood too, which is that fame is a fire, and if he ever stepped into it, he would never get a moment's peace again. And he was exactly right about that. The way she tells it, he once put the whole arrangement into a single sentence, and it is worth hearing in full, because it is the closest thing to a wedding vow this marriage ever made public. He told her, "I didn't choose this world, I chose you, and you chose that world, but we can keep our lives separate and together. Separate and together." That is the phrase to carry through the rest of this. Two lives run on two tracks, joined at the deepest point, and kept apart at every shallow one. He would have his roads and his farm and his quiet. She would have her lights and her crowds and her noise. And the marriage would live in the space between, unseen, unbothered theirs. The unseen part became a legend all its own, and not always a kind one, because Carl Dean was so completely absent from the public eye. The rumors started and never really stopped. He must not exist, people said. She must have invented him, a convenient husband to keep the suitors away and the questions polite. A man who was really just a story. For decades she heard it, that her own husband was a fiction, and it must have been a strange thing to carry, to have the world doubt the most solid fact of your life. She always denied it flatly. He is real, she would say. He is just not for you. And the more she refused to hand him over, the more the legend grew, until the absence of Carl Dean became, in its own way, as famous as Dolly Parton's presence. Here is the thing to understand before we go any further into the rise, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. Everybody thought the secret was that Carl Dean might not be real. The secret was the opposite. The secret was how completely, unglamorously, ordinarily real he was, and how much of herself she poured into a life the cameras never caught. While the world watched Dolly Parton become one of the most famous people alive, the actual center of her actual life was a paving contractor on a Tennessee farm who wanted nothing to do with any of it. That was the thing she guarded. That was the closet door she held shut from the inside, on purpose, because this time she was the one keeping the darkness in, and it was not fear in there. It was love. It was the one thing she had that the world could not have. Those first years in Nashville were leaner than the story usually lets on. The girl who told her graduating class she would be a star did not become one overnight. She got off that Greyhound into a city full of people, just as hungry as she was. And for a while she lived the way the hungry ones live, in cheap rooms on cheap food, running on nerve and songs. She wrote constantly, day and night, because writing was the one thing she had always been able to do, that nobody could take from her. And she carried those songs from office to office, trying to get somebody, anybody, to listen. Her Uncle Bill Owens, the man who had bought her that first little Martin guitar, was right there beside her through it. Two mountain people, knocking on doors in a town that did not owe them a thing. Slowly the doors opened, one at a time, the way they do for the stubborn. A song of hers would get cut by somebody with a bigger name. A little money would come in. then a little more. She learned the business from the inside, the publishing and the royalties, and the way a song could keep paying long after you stopped singing it. And she filed every bit of it away in the shrewd part of her mind she got from her father. By the time Carl put a ring on her finger, she was somebody in Nashville, not a star yet, but a name the men in the offices had started to say. She had done it the hard way, and she had done it fast, and she had done it without ever once losing the accent or the ambition she had carried down out of the mountains. And she was about to hitch that rising name to a television star who would lift her higher than she had ever been, and then hold on to her longer than she could stand. But a marriage that private needed a public career, loud enough to hide behind. And in the late 1960s, that career was still being built, and the man building it with her was about to become the first great conflict of her adult life. Because before Dolly Parton could be Dolly Parton, she had to get out from under Porter Wagoner. In 1967, Porter Wagoner was a country star with his own popular television show, a tall man in a rhinestone suit with a showman's grin and a sharp business mind. And he needed a new girl singer for his program. He had watched this young blonde with the big voice and the bigger ambition, and he took a chance on her. He put her on the Porter Wagoner show. He used his own leverage to get her a record deal with RCA, going so far, the story goes, as to offer the label his own royalties, to cover any losses if she failed. He believed in her. That part is true, and it matters, because Porter Wagoner is not the villain of this story either, no matter how the ending looks. For a while it worked beautifully. Their first duet, a remake of a song called The Last Thing on My Mind, became a top 10 country hit in early 1968, and from there they were off. Hit after hit, album after album, the two of them singing love songs into the same microphone, until half the country assumed they had to be a couple, or married, or both. The chemistry sold records. The chemistry also, off the stage, curdled into something harder to sing about. Those years on his show were the closest thing to a school she ever had. She learned how a television hour was put together, how a song was placed inside it, how a camera could be made to love a face if the face knew the camera was there. She learned to pace a set, to read a crowd from a lit stage where she could barely see them, to hold a note past the point where it was comfortable, because the holding was the thing people remembered. She watched Porter run every part of the operation, the bookings and the band and the budget, and even while it galled her, she was taking notes, filing away the machinery of the business the way she filed away everything, quietly, for later. He taught her more than he ever knew, and more than she would always want to admit. Some of what she learned was the craft. Some of it was the warning. She was watching up close exactly how a talented person could build a cage out of a career and then live inside it. And she was making a private vow, never to be the one holding the bars and never to be the one behind them. The road itself wore on her. Night after night in the same rhinestones, the same duets, the same drives between towns that all began to look alike through a bus window, smiling into the same lights, while the fight from the night before sat undigested in her chest. She was famous now, and she was tired in a way fame does not fix, the particular tiredness of a person doing beautiful work inside a situation that has quietly stopped fitting. She kept writing through all of it, in motel rooms and on the bus, because the writing was the one room Porter could not walk into. On the stage, they were the picture of country harmony. In the songs she wrote alone at night, she was already saying goodbye, because Dolly Parton was never going to be anybody's girl singer for long. She had walked up to Johnny Cash and demanded the Opry at 13. She had told a graduating class she was going to be a star and ridden a Greyhound into a city that owed her nothing. She was not built to stand a half step behind a man in a rhinestone suit and smile while he ran the show. And Porter Wagoner, for his part, was a proud man who had made her, or believed he had, and could not stand to watch the thing he made outgrow him. She has described them, looking back, as oil and water, and also in the same breath, as too much alike, both stubborn, both ambitious, both certain they were right. They fought. They fought about the music and the money and about personal things they had no business fighting over, and the fighting slowly poisoned a partnership that had been, at the start, one of the best things ever to happen to either of them. She has called him a male chauvinist, and said it without much heat, the way you describe the weather of a certain time. He wanted control, She would not give it. When a decision crossed a line she cared about, she would, in her words, pitch a fit, and she meant it. The money told the real story. For years, she was paid something like $300 a night, while her fame climbed and climbed. And instead of raising her pay, he showered her with gifts, cars, and jewelry. The kind of shine a man gives a woman when he does not want to give her power. She saw exactly what it was. A gift you cannot spend on your freedom is not a raise. She was black and blue inside from the constant fighting, she has said, unable to eat or sleep right, miserable in the middle of a success that looked, from the outside, like a dream. There is one fight that has become a kind of legend among people who know the story, because it says everything about how bad it got. Early in 1974, the two of them were on the road, and they ended up in a motel in Tulsa, and something set them off. And they went at it so loudly that the argument carried through the walls and out into the night, the whole place listening to a country music partnership tear itself apart. She did not sleep. She has said she could not eat or sleep right for a long stretch of those final years, that she felt beaten up on the inside, black and blue in a way that did not show. The next morning she made up her mind for good. She was going. There had been smaller wars along the way that told her the same truth. One of the worst came over a song. She had written a tender little thing called To Daddy, and instead of keeping it for the two of them the way Porter expected, she gave it to Emmylou Harris to record, because she believed in the song and believed in the singer and wanted it out in the world. Porter was furious. In his mind, her songs were their songs, part of the machine they had built together, and handing one to another artist was a kind of betrayal. To her, it was the whole point. A song was hers to give. She had learned that lesson from Elvis and Colonel Parker, learned it in her bones that ownership was freedom, and that a woman who let a man decide where her songs could go was a woman who did not really own them at all. The fight over To Daddy was never really about a song. It was about who Dolly Parton belonged to, and the answer, she had decided, was going to be nobody but herself. She had agreed to 5 years. She stayed 7, and by 1974 she knew, all the way down, that if she did not leave, she would never become the thing she had come out of the mountains to become. The trouble was that she could not make Porter hear it. Every time she tried to tell him she was going, the words bounced off him. He would not believe her, or would not let himself. So she did the only thing she had ever really known how to do when words failed. She went home and she wrote a song. She wrote 2, actually, on the very same day. And between them, they would earn more money and love than most artists make in a lifetime. Stop and let the size of that sink in. 2 songs in a single day. And one of them would become the biggest-selling goodbye ever recorded, and the other, one of the most covered songs in country music. And she wrote them both between other chores. The way another woman might put up 2 jars of preserves. That was not luck. That was the output of a person who had been writing every day, since she was a barefoot 5-year-old crooning to a doll made of corn, who treated songs not as lightning strikes but as work, steady, daily, holy work. She has said the songs come to her in the night, that she keeps something to write with by the bed, that she has woken in the dark with a whole melody, already finished in her head, and had to catch it before it slipped back into sleep. She wrote in cars and in dressing rooms, and in the quiet after everyone else had gone down. She has claimed thousands of songs over her life, far more than she has ever released, whole drawers and vaults of them, enough to keep pouring out long after she is gone. For her, it was never only a career. It was closer to prayer, a way of talking to God with the radio on, the thing her preacher grandfather did with a fiddle, and her mother did over a washtub, passed down into a girl who turned it into an industry, without ever letting it stop being sacred. People marveled that she could write 2 immortal songs in one afternoon. What they should have marveled at is that, to her, it was just Tuesday. The genius was not the flash. The genius was the faucet she had left running her whole life, so that on any given day, if the water came, she was standing there with a bucket. One was Jolene, the other was a goodbye. She wrote it for Porter Wagoner, a way of saying everything she could not make him hear in a room, that she was leaving, that it was not because she did not love him, that she would carry him with her wherever she went. She called it I Will Always Love You. Then she did something braver than writing it. She played it for him. She sat down in front of the man she was leaving and sang him the song about leaving him. And when she finished, Porter Wagoner, the proud man in the rhinestone suit, cried. He told her it was the prettiest song he had ever heard, and he told her she could go on one condition, that he got to produce the record. She agreed. That is how the most famous goodbye song in American music came to be, not as a breakup with a lover, but as a young woman's way of setting herself free from the man who had made her and could not let her grow. Leaving was not the end of it. It rarely is with two proud people who once loved working together. Dolly walked away in 1974, and the split, which had started with tears over a beautiful song, hardened over the next few years into something with lawyers in it. Porter felt she had left him wrong. He felt she had used him to climb, and then kicked away the ladder, and that she was moving away from him as a producer too, cutting him out of the success he believed he had built. In 1979, he sued her for something like $3 million, claiming she owed him a piece of her career, a percentage of what she earned and would go on earning, on the theory that he had made her a star, and a star was partly his to keep. She believed she could have beaten him in court. She has said so plainly, but a court fight would have been long and bitter in public, and it would have dragged her family, and above all, her quiet husband into exactly the kind of spectacle. Carl Dean had married her on the condition of avoiding, so she settled. Around 1980, she paid Porter Wagoner roughly $1 million to make it end, and she has never pretended it was easy money. It was, she has said, the first $1 million she ever made, and paying it took everything she had, and everything Carl had, and everything she could see herself earning for years to come. She wrote a check that emptied her life to buy back her peace, and she did it in part to keep her husband out of a courtroom. Even her lawsuits were arranged around protecting the man nobody could see. The strangest thing about the whole feud is how it ended, because it did not end in hatred. Over the following years, the two of them found their way back to something like friendship. Porter came to say, publicly, that the lawyers had twisted the story, that he was not bitter, that he loved her and was proud of having helped build her, and that the real story of the two of them never got told right. They both apologized. She admitted she had been difficult too, that she fought hard for what she believed, and that a fighter is not always easy to be around. She forgave him and asked his forgiveness back. And when he was dying of lung cancer in the fall of 2007, at 80 years old, she went to him. She sat at his bedside in hospice, held his hand, sang to him, prayed with him, thanked him for every door he had opened for her, told him everything between them was fine, and that he could let go without carrying any of it. She has said he squeezed her hand when she said it. He died within hours of her visit. The man who had once tried to own a piece of her forever left the world with her thanks in his ears and his hand in hers. Think of what it took to sit in that room. This was the man who had underpaid her, tried to control her, and then sued her for a piece of everything she would ever earn. A lawsuit that took every dollar she and Carl had. A lesser person and a fair one would have felt entitled to stay home. She went. She sang to him. She thanked him and meant it for the doors he had opened before he ever tried to lock her in. She has said she wanted to leave him free of any worry between them so that he could go in peace. And she gave him that, the woman he had wronged handing him a clean conscience. On his last day, forgiveness like that is not a soft thing. It is a decision, made again and again, by someone strong enough to lay a grudge down and walk away from it. She had been laying grudges down her whole life. She laid this one down at a dying man's bedside and held his hand while he went. That is who she is. She does not keep villains. She keeps people, faults and all, and she finds a way to close the account clean before it is too late. And this was never just a policy she adopted as a famous woman who could afford to be gracious. It went all the way back to the beginning. She never got even with the children who shoved her into that closet, never named them, never used her enormous fame to shame the town that once called her family trash. She never went back to prove anything to the people who snickered at a graduation. She never held the low pay and the male chauvinism against Porter once he was dying and needed her. She never resented the woman in town whose red lipstick started the whole look. Never let anyone mock the memory of a person the town threw away. Somewhere in that hungry, crowded cabin, she decided that carrying grudges was a weight she could not afford, that a person with as far to climb as she could not spare the energy hate demands. So she let it all go, again and again, And the letting go was not weakness. It was the hardest and most disciplined thing about her. Harder than the wigs, harder than the business, harder than the songs. She forgave everyone. It is the reason there are no villains in her story, not because the world was kind to her, but because she refused on principle to keep any. But go back to that day in 1973, the day she wrote the goodbye song, Because I Will Always Love You is about to do something almost no song ever does. It is about to become the center of the smartest, hardest business decision of her life, a decision that turned on a single word, and that word was no. The song was a #1 country hit for her in 1974, and Dolly, who had learned her father's shrewdness in her bones, owned it outright. She had set up her own publishing company early, before most artists thought to, precisely so that her songs would belong to her, and not to some man in an office. She thought of her songs the way her people thought of land. You do not sell the land. The land is what feeds the family after you are gone. Then Elvis Presley heard the song and wanted it, not just to sing, but to record, which for a songwriter is a kind of coronation. Priscilla Presley later told Dolly that Elvis had sung I Will Always Love You to her, as the two of them walked down the courthouse steps after their divorce, which is almost too perfect a use of that song to be real. And yet it was. Now Elvis was ready to cut it himself. His people invited Dolly to come to the studio and hear the king of rock and roll sing her farewell song. She was over the moon. She told everyone she knew Elvis Presley was going to record her song. And the night before the session, the phone rang, and it was Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, and he had a condition. Elvis did not record a song, the Colonel explained, unless Elvis's side got the publishing, or at the very least half of it. This was how the Colonel did business. He squeezed a publishing cut out of nearly everything Elvis touched, because that was where the long money lived, in the ownership, in the royalties that kept paying decade after decade. He was not being cruel to Dolly. He was doing to her exactly what he did to everyone. He was very good at it. Dolly said no. Understand what that no cost her in the moment. She was a young woman being asked to give up half a song in exchange for hearing Elvis Presley sing it, and she said no. She told the Colonel the song was already a hit, that it was the most important copyright her little company owned, and that those royalties were not hers alone to give away, because they were meant to take care of her family, her brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, long after she was gone. The Colonel said, then Elvis will not record it, and the session was canceled. She cried all night. She has never hidden that. She knew Elvis would have sung it like nobody else could, that he would have taken her little goodbye and made it enormous, and she had thrown that away over a business point. Her friends told her she was crazy. Maybe in that moment she felt crazy too, but something down in her, the same something that came from a father who traded horses and never once got cheated, told her to hold on to what was hers. She has said that if the song had been new, unpublished, unproven, she might have made the deal. But it was already a hit, already hers, and you do not sell the land. There is one more thing she said about those royalties that night, and it lands harder once you know how her life turned out. She told the Colonel that the money from her songs was meant for her family, and that she thought of her songs the way other people think of children, as the things you make that go on living after you, the things that will take care of the people you love when you are gone. She did not know yet that she would never have children of her own. She did not know that a surgery 10 years off would close that door for good. But some deep part of her had already decided that her songs would be her children, that they would carry her name forward and provide for her people the way babies were supposed to. When the doctors took the possibility of motherhood from her body, she had already, without meaning to, built another kind of family out of copyrights and melodies, a family of songs that would outlive her and take care of everyone she loved. She protected them like children because, it turned out, they were the only children she would ever have. Now watch what that one word bought her. Almost 20 years later, in 1992, a young singer named Whitney Houston recorded I Will Always Love You for a film called The Bodyguard. And it did not just become a hit. It became one of the biggest songs in the history of recorded music. 14 weeks at #1. Tens of millions of copies sold around the world. A wall of sound that seemed to play out of every radio on Earth for a solid year. And every time it played, every single time, The woman who wrote it got paid because she had refused, all those years before, to give away half of it to the king. She has joked that the money from Whitney's version alone was enough to buy Graceland, Elvis's own mansion, which is a joke with a blade in it. What she actually did with a large part of it was quieter and truer to who she is. She bought a piece of commercial property in a mostly black neighborhood in Nashville, an office complex, an investment in a community she connected to Whitney Houston, and she called it the house that Whitney built. The girl who was paid for with a sack of cornmeal had learned to turn a song into a building and a refusal into a fortune. That publishing catalog is worth well over $100 million now, and it still pays out year after year. And it all traces back to a night she cried until dawn and still would not say yes. That is the engine underneath the glamour, and people miss it because the glamour is so loud. They see the wigs and the nails and the giggle and they think, sweet, harmless, a cartoon. And the cartoon is real. She built it on purpose. We will get to exactly how. But behind the cartoon is one of the shrewdest business minds American music has ever produced. A woman who owns her work, protects her family, keeps her own counsel, and says no to Elvis Presley himself when saying no is the right call. Remember that when we get to the marriage, the same woman who would not hand half a song to Colonel Parker was never going to hand her husband to the tabloids. She knew what was hers and she kept it. By the end of the 1970s and into 1980, the mountain girl who told a graduating class she would be a star had become one of the most famous women in America, and she was about to become a movie star on top of it. The film was called 9 to 5, and it put her alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin as three working women, getting even with a terrible boss, and it was a smash. She had never acted before. She walked onto that set the way she had walked up to Johnny Cash, certain she belonged and the country agreed. She even wrote the theme song, tapping out the rhythm on her long acrylic nails between takes, a clatter that sounded exactly like a typewriter clacking away in a busy office, so that she turned the sound of working women's own hands into a hook. The whole country hummed. It went to #1 and earned her an Academy Award nomination. And there she was, a girl from a cabin with no electricity, sitting in a Hollywood theater in a gown, while the industry that had once been so far above her waited to see if she would win. She did not win the award that night. It did not matter. She had already won the thing that counted, which was proof that the ambition she announced to a laughing graduating class had been right all along. The people who snickered when she said she was going to be a star had lived to watch her be nominated for an Oscar for a song she wrote with her fingernails. Overnight, she was not just a country singer. She was a movie star, a crossover, a face the whole world knew. And here at the very top, the machinery of the image was running at full power. So let us finally look straight at it, because the look is not a footnote. The look is the argument. It is the whole thesis of Dolly Parton, stated in hair and paint. The look did not come only from the woman in town. It came from everywhere a poor girl could find a glimpse of a bigger, brighter world. She pored over the Fredericks of Hollywood catalogs that promised a kind of glamour no one in Sevier County could afford, studying the shapes and the shine, the way another child might study a school book. She looked at the platinum movie star blondes the whole world was swooning over, the Bridget Bardots with their piled hair and their painted mouths, and she stitched all of it together in her imagination into a single dream of what a woman could be if she refused to be plain. She was assembling a person out of catalogs and daydreams, and a town tramp's red lipstick, the way she had once assembled a guitar out of a broken mandolin and a corncob doll out of trash. She built the fantasy of Dolly Parton the same way she built everything, out of almost nothing by hand, with more want than material. And here is the part the jokes always miss. The look was never really about vanity, and it was never really about men. It was about control. A woman who decides exactly how the whole world is going to see her can never again be caught off guard, never again be shoved into a closet for the sin of looking poor, never again be the overlooked fourth of 12. Every morning she painted on the same face and pulled on the same crown, and every morning that ritual said the same thing to the frightened girl still living inside her. You will not be small today. You will not be plain today. You will decide what they see. The armor was so bright, and so funny that nobody ever noticed it was armor. That was the genius of it. She hid the fortress in plain sight, behind a giggle and a rhinestone. The wigs came first out of necessity. She had bleached and teased her own hair since she was a girl, and years of that will ruin a head of hair. So she switched to hairpieces and then to full wigs, and once she did, she never really looked back. She has said she owns at least 365 of them, one for every day of the year, and she means it as a joke and also as a plain inventory. A wig means she is never at the mercy of a bad hair day, never caught unready, never small. A stylist has kept that collection for decades. At home, she might pull her own hair up in a scrunchie and poof it a little, but out in the world, at work, in front of a camera or a crowd, the wig goes on, almost every single day. A crown she never takes off in public. The face is the same discipline. Her makeup is heavy and bright, and exactly the same silhouette. No matter the year, strong brows, a painted lip, a finish built to survive stage lights and flashbulbs, and she can put the whole thing on herself in 15 or 20 minutes, because she has been doing it since she was stealing char off burnt matchsticks. She has said, and this one tells you everything, that she sleeps in her makeup, so that she is always ready, ambulance ready, earthquake ready, tornado ready. Never once caught by surprise, looking like anything other than Dolly Parton. She cleans her face in the morning and paints it right back on. Even alone, even at home, she rarely lets herself be seen without it. The girl who was locked in the dark grew into a woman who would not be caught unlit, ever, not even by her own husband. She has been just as honest about the rest of it, the surgeries, in a way almost no star of her generation ever dared to be. She never claimed to be a natural beauty. She has said the opposite, that she was not born beautiful. And so, she built the beauty she wanted, piece by piece, the way she built everything else. Over the years, she has owned up to the work without a flinch. The lifts and the tucks, the eyes, the little bits done a little at a time to keep the whole picture holding together. She turned it into a slogan, the way she turns everything into a slogan. And the slogan is pure Dolly. If something is bagging, sagging, or dragging, she says, "I'll tuck it, suck it, or pluck it." She does not call it vanity. She calls it maintenance, like keeping up a racehorse or a show dog, the upkeep of a professional image and a personal pride. But she draws one line under all of it, and this is the line that matters most, the sentence that unlocks the whole thing. "I may look fake," she says, "but I'm real where it counts." Sit with that. The look is a construction, and she will be the first to tell you so, laughing. But the construction is not a lie about who she is. It is a truth about who she always felt she was, ever since she stood in that dusty town and decided the woman everyone called trash was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The paint is not covering the real Dolly. The paint is the little girl's dream of the real Dolly, made flesh at last. And the real where it counts, the part the paint could never touch, she kept for exactly one place and one person, out on a farm, away from every camera in the world. Which brings us back, at the height of her fame, to Carl, because there is a song from these years that people think is about a love triangle, and in a way it is, only not the way they think. Jolene, the other song she wrote the same day as the Goodbye to Porter, is a song about a woman begging a red-haired beauty not to take her man. For years fans wondered who Jolene was, and the answer turns out to be small and human and married. There was a red-haired bank teller back home who seemed a little too interested in Carl Dean, and who Carl, being human and being flattered, seemed to enjoy the attention of. And Dolly, the most desired woman in the country, felt the oldest feeling in the world curl up in her stomach. Jealousy, ordinary, unglamorous, wide-awake at night jealousy over a paving contractor and a bank teller. She turned it into one of the greatest songs ever written, of course, because that is what she does with pain. She makes it sing. But look at what the song tells you about the marriage. All the money and fame and lights in the world, and what she was afraid of losing, was a quiet man who laid roads for a living. He was the prize. He was always the prize. The world thought Dolly Parton was the treasure everyone wanted, and she spent a sleepless night writing a masterpiece because she was scared a bank teller was going to take her husband. That is not the story of a paper marriage. That is the story of a woman in love, hiding it in plain sight, in a song the whole world would sing, without ever knowing whose kitchen it came from. She was at the very top now, #1 records, a hit movie, a face on every magazine, a fortune she owned outright, a husband she adored and protected. From the outside, in the early 1980s, Dolly Parton looked like a woman who had won. And this is exactly the point in the story where the ground opened up under her, because the years just ahead of her were about to become, in her own words, the very bottom of her life, as far as her health and her emotions were concerned. The bright girl, who never let herself be caught in the dark, was about to spend 3 years in the darkest place she had ever been. It started, as these things often do, with a body that had been running too hard for too long. She had been, by her own admission, getting away with murder, working herself past all reason, ignoring her health, eating badly, sleeping little, carrying a load of unspoken trouble underneath, a smile she never let slip. Somewhere around 35, the bill came due. She began to have severe pain in her abdomen, internal bleeding, one thing after another going wrong in a body she had always been able to simply order to keep going. The first big warning came on stage. She had been hemorrhaging, bleeding in a way that frightened her doctors, and they told her not to perform. She performed anyway, because she always performed, because the show was the one thing that had never let her down. And in Indianapolis, in front of a crowd, her body finally quit on her, and she nearly collapsed on the stage. The lights she loved so much, the lights that were the opposite of the closet, and she was going down under them, bleeding in front of everyone. That was the moment even Dolly Parton could not smile past. The diagnosis was endometriosis, a condition where tissue like the lining of the womb grows where it should not, and it can bring terrible pain and terrible bleeding, and very often, the end of any chance at children. The treatment in the mid-1980s, when she was around 36, was surgery. She underwent a partial hysterectomy, the removal of her womb, and with it went the last possibility of ever carrying a child of her own. To understand what that took from her, you have to remember a baby named Larry, dead at 4 days old when Dolly was 9. The baby her mother had told her was hers to care for. You have to remember a lonely girl in a crowded cabin who mothered her younger siblings, who sang to her mother's belly, who has said all her life that she loves children with her whole heart. This was not a woman who never wanted a family. Early in the marriage, she and Carl had assumed they would have children, had talked about names, had a girl's name picked out, Carla, after him. They were not doing anything to stop it, she has said. They dreamed about what the babies might look like. And then it simply did not happen. And now, on an operating table in her mid-30s, a doctor was closing that door for good. She has said the surgery made her feel, all at once, like a middle-aged woman, like something in her had aged 20 years overnight, and it opened a trapdoor into a depression deeper than anything she had known. This is the part of the story she kept hidden longest, and only told years later, and we should tell it the way she finally did, plainly, without dressing it up. Her body swelled from the medications and the surgery, close to 50 pounds of weight she could not control, and she waged a private war on it with one desperate diet after another. Liquid protein, water fasts, every fad going, followed by binges she has compared to any other addiction. 3 whole pizzas at a sitting, and still hungry for more. She has said overeating was as much a sickness as drink or drugs for her in those years, a way to fill a hole that had nothing to do with food. She stopped recognizing herself in the mirror, which for a woman who had built her whole self out of the mirror was its own kind of drowning, and the timing could not have been crueler, because all of this hit while her career was at its most demanding, and her personal life was quietly coming apart. She was making a movie called The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, playing the madam of a brothel, opposite Burt Reynolds, and the production was a misery. She has called it a nightmare, a bloodbath, a set full of bickering, where she wore herself out trying to keep everyone happy, which was always her way, and which left nothing over for herself. People were being fired left and right. The whole thing ground at her, while her body betrayed her and her heart, it turned out, was breaking over something she has never fully explained. Because in the middle of those years there was a man, not Carl. She has called it an affair of the heart, and she has been careful with the words her whole life, careful in a way that tells you it still hurts. His name, as it is widely understood though she has never spelled it all the way out, was Greg Perry, her bandleader and musical partner through that punishing stretch. He was educated in a way the men in her world often were not. And during those long months of touring and filming and pain, she let herself, as she put it, get completely wrapped up in him. She had never spent so much close time with a man like that. Her closest friend from childhood, Judy Ogle, who was always at her side, felt like a third wheel next to the intensity of it. She has never said it crossed into a physical affair, and it is not our place to say what she has chosen not to. What she has said is that it was a love, that it was real, and that when he left, when he walked away from the project and out of the music business, right at the lowest point of her whole life, it shattered her. "My heart was shattered," she said, "not by romance but by an affair of the heart, and it about killed me." She cried an ocean, she said. She has never said in all the years since exactly what that love was, whether it lived only in her heart or somewhere past it, and she has earned the right to that silence 100 times over. What she has admitted is enough, that she let a man other than her husband get all the way inside her, at the lowest moment of her life, and that when he left it nearly finished her. She wrote a song about that heartache too, the way she writes a song about everything, turning even this into a melody, so she could carry it without being crushed by it. And then, hollowed out and half destroyed, she did the only thing the whole architecture of her marriage had been built to let her do. She went home, whatever that affair of the heart had been. She came back to the quiet man on the farm, and he was there, and the wall held, and the marriage survived a wound that would have ended almost any other. That was the deal, and the deal was stronger than the heartbreak. She always came home. She had promised him that on the drive back from the one awards dinner he ever attended, and she kept it through the worst year of her life, when keeping it was the hardest thing in the world. Put it all together, the surgery and the lost babies and the runaway weight and the movie that felt like a war and the man who left, and you have a woman standing at the edge of something with nothing left to hold on to. It is worth slowing down on just how much came at her at once, because no single one of these things would have broken her, and all of them together nearly did. The movie set was a war she was expected to win with a smile. She has described the whole production of that film in language she almost never uses about anything, calling it a nightmare and a bloodbath, a place where people were fired one after another, and the tension never let up, where she wore herself thin trying to keep the peace among people who did not want peace. That was always her instinct, to be the one who made everybody feel better, and it left her with nothing for herself. At the same time, her body was failing her in ways she could not hide and could not fix. The bleeding and the pain and the weight that would not come off no matter how she starved herself. At the same time, she was canceling shows, and promoters who had once been her friends were suing her for the dates she could not play. At the same time, there were death threats serious enough to bring in the police, so that a woman already frightened of the dark now had reason to be frightened in the light too. At the same time, her heart was breaking over the man she called an affair of the heart, the collaborator who had gotten so far under her skin and then walked away when she needed him most. And underneath all of it sat the surgery and the babies she would never have, and the strange new feeling that she had turned old overnight. She did have one steadying presence in that stretch, and it came from an unlikely place. She was making another film around then with Sylvester Stallone, and by her own account, he was kind to her in the middle of her worst stretch, a friend when she badly needed one. But friends can only reach so far into a hole that deep. She kept eating and kept starving and kept working and kept smiling, and inside she was going down. And one night the going down reached the bottom, and one night alone in her bedroom, she picked up a gun. She kept it for protection. She had been getting death threats in those years, real ones, serious enough that police and private security were involved. One more weight on a woman already carrying too many. So the gun was there in the house for safety. And on the worst night of the worst year, she took it out and she held it, and she thought about using it on herself. She has been careful ever since to say she does not fully believe she would have gone through with it, that some part of her would have stopped. But she has also said that in that moment the pain was so great she finally understood how a person gets there, how someone reaches the point where it seems like the only door left. She has said it made her forever more gentle toward people the world writes off, the ones who drink and drug and die of their own hands, because she stood at that same edge and looked over. What stopped her was a dog. She had a little Boston Terrier named Popeye, and at the exact moment she sat there with the gun, she heard his paws come scrambling up the stairs, tick 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 on the wood, running toward her the way a dog runs toward the person it loves. The sound of it broke through. She put the gun down. She got on her knees and she prayed. She has said in the years since that maybe that little dog was a messenger sent from God, that maybe those paws on the stairs were an answered prayer. She had not even known how to ask. Whatever it was, she lived. The brightest woman in America, saved from the dark by a dog running up the stairs. She never went to a therapist. That was not her way, and it was not her people's way. Instead, she did the only thing that had ever really healed her, all the way back to a corncob doll and a closet and a coat made of rags. She wrote, "My music," she has said, "has always been my best doctor." Even at her lowest, she kept writing, and the writing pulled her back up, hand over hand. She leaned on her faith, on prayer, on family, on sheer bloody-minded will, and slowly, she has said, she made herself snap out of it. She came to see the whole collapse, as God smacking her down, forcing her to stop and fix the things she had been running past for years. She emerged in her own telling, a better person and a better writer, having torn her whole self down to the studs and rebuilt it stronger. And through all of it, the collapse, and the surgery, and the affair of the heart, and the gun on the worst night, there was a marriage that did not break. This is where the whole story starts to turn back toward its center, because the thing that saved her, past the songs and the faith and the little dog, was the strained and separate architecture of the life she had built with Carl Dean. She always came home. That was the deal, and it held, even when everything else was falling. Whatever crushes and heartbreaks and affairs of the heart moved through those punishing years. The man on the farm was the ground she came back to stand on. People have asked her over and over how a marriage that unusual lasted so long, and her answers are so funny and so plain that it is easy to miss how much truth is packed into them. Part of the secret, she has said, with a straight face, is that she stays gone. She was on the road, in the studio, on a movie set, somewhere under the lights for most of the year, and he was home on his land, and the two of them spent great stretches of their lives apart, and she thinks that is one reason they never wore each other out. Absence did not threaten them, it protected them. The gaps in the marriage were the breathing room that kept it alive. But then look at what they did when they were together, because it is the opposite of everything you would picture. No premieres, no yachts, no parties. They climbed into an RV and drove the back roads of Tennessee and Kentucky, two people in an old camper, rolling through small towns where nobody expected to see Dolly Parton, because nobody could imagine Dolly Parton in a camper. They had picnics by the river, they had quiet nights at home, and now and then, the richest self-made woman in the state and her paving contractor husband would pull through a drive-through and get themselves a couple of tacos, because Carl liked a Taco Bell run, and because the whole point of him was that he did not need anything fancier, and neither, when she was with him, did she. He hated to fly, so they went by car. They lived, when they were together, like the people they had been before any of it, a poor girl and a working man, taking the long way home. There is a reason she guarded those ordinary hours so fiercely, and it goes back to the phrase Carl gave her at the very start: separate and together. Most couples try to close every gap between them, to share every friend and every meal and every plan, and they call that closeness. These two did the opposite, and it was the most intimate thing about them. They gave each other whole territories. The other one never entered. She never asked him to love the spotlight. He never asked her to give it up. And because neither of them was forever trying to change the other, the small shared world they did build, the camper, the river, the drive-through supper, the quiet farmhouse, stayed clean of all the resentment that eats most marriages alive. They were not two halves of one person. They were two whole people who had decided on purpose to leave each other free. It should not have worked. On paper, it is the opposite of everything you are told a marriage needs. It lasted 60 years. She has told the world, again and again, that Carl was her complete opposite, and that the opposites were the point. Quiet where she was loud, grounded where she floated, blue jeans where she wore rhinestones. He was not jealous of the attention she got, not threatened by the fame, not interested in a single crumb of it for himself. He was proud of her, her biggest fan and her best-kept secret at the same time. He let her be entirely herself, and she never once tried to drag him into the light he could not stand. That was the respect at the bottom of the whole thing. She did not need him to be Dolly's husband in public. He did not need her to be plain little Dolly Parton Dean at home. Each of them let the other be exactly what they were, and asked for nothing back but loyalty and laughter, and got both for nearly 60 years. And the children they never had became over time, not a wound, but a kind of quiet freedom she made peace with in a way that took decades. In the raw years right after the surgery, it was pure grief. But as she and Carl grew older together, they came to say to each other, more than once, that they were glad in the end they had never had kids of their own to worry about, given the roads their lives had taken. She has said in a line she comes back to often, that God did not mean for her to have children so that everybody's children could be hers. And she meant it as more than a comfort. She meant it as a mission. She poured the mothering she never got to spend on her own babies into an ocean of other people's children, her nieces and nephews, and their children call her by names that would make you smile. Aunt Granny to some, and Carl was Uncle Peepaw, a paving contractor with a nickname out of a nursery. She became a kind of second mother to a young Miley Cyrus, her goddaughter, and most of all, she built the Imagination Library, a program that has now mailed hundreds of millions of free books to small children all over the world, so that a child in a poor house with newspaper in the walls might have a book of her own, might learn to read, might never have to feel the shame her own illiterate father carried his whole life. The babies she lost became millions of children she would never meet, each one holding a book she sent. Ask her if she regrets not having her own, and in her later years she will tell you honestly that she has not missed it the way she once feared she would. She turned the emptiest place in her life into the fullest thing she ever built. It did not come easily, and she has never pretended it did. For years she carried a quiet uncertainty about it, and she has been honest that she used to think she was supposed to regret it, that a woman without children was supposed to feel a permanent ache where the babies would have been. There were seasons when she felt that ache sharply, especially in the raw years right after the surgery, when the loss was a wound and not yet a shape she could live inside. But time did with it what time does. As she and Carl grew old together on that farm, the regret slowly turned into something else, into a kind of gratitude that surprised her. She came to believe, all the way down, that if she had been a mother she would have been, a homebody, that she would have felt too guilty to leave a child and go chase the life that was burning in her, that she would have worried herself sick every mile she was away, and that there would have been no Dolly Parton at all, only a good and devoted mother in a small Tennessee town, which is a fine thing to be, but not the thing she was born to be. The freedom to become herself completely, she has said, was a big part of everything that followed. She did not get to be a mother, she got to be everybody's, and somewhere. In her later years, she stopped grieving the trade and started being thankful for it. There was one more secret hidden on her body itself, small and pastel and tender, and it belonged more than to anyone to Carl. Dolly's skin scars badly. She has a tendency toward what doctors call keloid scarring, raised marks that on her very fair skin often stay, a permanent purple that never fades. And over the years, with the surgeries and the illnesses, she collected a number of them. So she started quietly to have them covered with small tattoos, not bold or dark, but soft ones, pastels, little ribbons and bows and butterflies and flowers, an angel here and there scattered over the marks she wanted gone. She was very sick at one point and needed a feeding tube, which left a small sunken scar on her side. And rather than hate it, she had a tiny beehive tattooed over it, yellow and brown, with one little bee on top, and the sinkhole where the tube had been became the mouth of the hive. She has called it making a positive out of a negative, which is the whole philosophy of her life in one small tattoo. Almost no one has ever seen them. She keeps them under long sleeves and high collars, hidden by the very glamour that hides everything she wants hidden. She has said they are scattered here and there where she needs them, not where you can see them, and that they are mostly for her husband, a woman who spent her life being looked at by millions, kept a private, painted, decorated body that she showed to one man on a farm. The butterflies meant something to her, always had, all the way back to a barefoot girl, chasing them through the Tennessee woods. Because a butterfly, she has said, does not sting and does not bite and is just beautiful. She put butterflies over her scars and showed them to Carl. That is about as good a picture of that marriage as exists anywhere. The public got the wigs, he got the butterflies. Now a marriage that private, run by a woman that flirtatious and famous, was always going to draw talk. And Dolly has handled the talk over the years with a wink that has confused people for 50 years. She has said out loud that men are her weakness, that she has crushes on the strangest men, short ones, bald ones, skinny ones, that she flirts and Carl flirts and neither of them minds. She has called it an open relationship, and then, in the same breath, slammed the door on what people think that means. Open, she has said, but not sexually. She would come home. She always came home, and she was not sleeping with anyone out there. She was just flirting and having fun. And if she ever thought Carl had crossed the line, she has said she would kill him, and he would do the same to her. The flirting was a game. The fidelity was a wall. Way back in 1978, a magazine asked her straight out whether a woman on the road as much as she was might sleep around. And her answer has kept people guessing ever since. "How do you know I don't?" she said. Then she went on that if she were ever weak enough to have an affair, Carl would never know about it and would never feel one effect from it, because she would carry it to her grave rather than let it touch him. That is the closest she has ever come to an admission, and it is not an admission at all. It is a woman drawing the exact edge of her own privacy and daring you to guess what is on the other side. She does not admit and she does not deny. She lets people believe what they want, and nobody, she has always said, could ever take Carl's place. So the question in the end is beside the point. The rumors came anyway, decade after decade, and she treated them mostly with amusement. When she made that miserable movie with Burt Reynolds, the sparks on screen set off talk of a real romance, and she got Carl's written permission for the love scenes, and joked that she could not wait to jump into bed with Burt Reynolds in the movie, not in real life. When people pressed her on the specifics, she would say she was not saying yes, and she was not saying no, and let it hang there. Carl himself, far from being wounded by any of it, seems to have found the whole circus funny. The story goes that he once suggested sending the press a photograph of Dolly with their dog, captioned as Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton's baby. That was his answer to the tabloids, a joke about the dog. He knew who came home to him. And that is the sentence people always come back to, the one Dolly has said, that seems to hold the whole marriage in it. Carl, she has said, knew every hair in my wig. Think about what that means from a woman whose entire public self is a construction. He knew the wig was a wig. He knew which hair was which. He knew the face under the paint, the head under the crown, the scars under the butterflies, the girl under the star. Everyone else on earth got Dolly Parton. He got the whole true woman, and he was the only one who did. And he never told a soul, because telling was never who he was. The most seen woman in the world was fully seen by exactly one person, and she spent her life making sure it stayed that way. There is a difference, and Dolly Parton understood it better than almost anyone, between being looked at and being seen. She had spent her whole life being looked at. That was the hunger of the crowded cabin, the promise of the town tramp's red lipstick, the reason for the wigs and the lights, and the whole enormous machine of her fame. To be looked at is to be a picture, an image, a shape people project their wishes onto. She had made herself the most looked at woman in the world, and there was joy in it, and control in it, and safety in it. But being looked at is not the same as being known, and a person can stand in the brightest lights on earth and still feel like nobody has actually seen her. Then a young man outside a laundromat looked at her face instead of her body, and something in her recognized, all at once, the one thing all the looking could never give her. He was not projecting a wish onto her. He was seeing her, and she spent the next 60 years arranging her entire life, the public spectacle and the private wall and everything in between, so that she could go on being seen by that one man in private for as long as they both lived. The lights were for the world. Carl was for the seeing. She gave the crowds the looking they wanted so that she could keep the being seen for herself. That was the trade at the center of everything, and she made it on the very first day, and she never once regretted it. They renewed their vows in 2016 for their 50th anniversary, A small private ceremony with almost no one there. The way they had married in the first place, quietly on their own terms, out of the light. She dressed up. He put on a suit, which for Carl Dean was its own kind of love letter. 50 years after a laundromat, they promised it all again, and she was so moved by it that she made a whole album out of the feeling and called it Pure and Simple, which is what the marriage had been from the start and what it stayed to the end. Pure, simple, hidden, theirs. And then, near the very end of his long, quiet life, she found out something about her husband that she had never known. And it is the sweetest secret in a story full of secrets. All those years, it turned out, Carl Dean had been going to Dollywood alone. He would drive to the theme park that carried his wife's name, and he would buy his own ticket like any other visitor, and stand in the line and walk the grounds, and watch the families ride the rides and eat the funnel cakes, and take in the whole world his wife had built out of a mountain childhood. And no one ever knew he was there. He never once asked for special treatment. He never used her name. He never wanted to be waved past a line or handed a free pass, because he never wanted to be Dolly's husband. He just wanted to see it. He wanted to walk through the things she had made and be proud of her in private, the only way he ever did anything, and then go home. Picture him again, the tall, quiet man in the ball cap, standing in line at his wife's own park, paying full price. A stranger among strangers, so happy and so hidden. That was Carl Dean's love. It did not need an audience. It did not need a photograph. It went to Dollywood by itself, bought a ticket, and told no one. She learned about it and treasured it. This proof that the man who fled every spotlight had quietly, patiently, on his own, gone to stand inside the biggest light she ever built, just to see what his girl had done. Carl Dean died on the 3rd of March, 2025, at the age of 82. After nearly 60 years, the quiet man was gone. Dolly announced it in a statement as spare and dignified as the man himself. "Carl and I spent many wonderful years together," she said. "Words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years. Thank you for your prayers and sympathy." That was nearly all. She asked for privacy, the last gift she could give him, the same gift she had guarded for 6 decades. No cause was made public. The man who had never let the world in was not going to let it in now, and she made sure of it. Later, slowly, she let a little more of it out, because grief is a pressure that has to go somewhere. She revealed that he had been ill for a long time, that he had suffered a great deal, and that part of her found a hard kind of peace in the fact that his suffering was over, that he was, as she put it, in God's arms. But she was clear that peace did not fill the hole. It still doesn't make up for the loss, she said, and the loneliness of it. The hardest part, she found, was not the big grief but the small emptiness, the daily business of learning to make new plans when there was no longer a him to make them with. She had loved this man since she was 18 years old, standing outside a laundromat. She did not know how to be a person who was not loving him. The world tried to hold her up in the way the world knows how. Flowers came by the truckload, so many that she said her house and her porch looked like the botanical gardens. And cards came until they filled a whole room. She was grateful for all of it, and it helped. And it could not touch the actual thing, because the actual thing was not a public sorrow that flowers could reach. It was the small, private arithmetic of a life suddenly missing its other half. The first holiday without him. The first wedding anniversary with no one across the table. The first anniversary of the day he died. She has called it the year of firsts, and she has said in that plain way of hers that those firsts were hard for her, that she will always love him, and that she will always miss him. There is no getting around a year of firsts. You can only get through it, one first at a time. For a while, she could not even do the thing that had healed every other wound of her life. She said she had to set some of the songwriting aside, because she could not afford in that season to feel things as deeply as writing a song makes you feel them. The best doctor she had ever had was suddenly too strong a medicine. The ideas kept coming, the way they always had, since she was 5 years old and singing to a corncob doll. But she could not always sit in the room with them. Grief had done what nothing else ever managed. It had, for a little while, taken her songs away. The strangeness of it was that, for the first time in nearly 60 years, Dolly Parton started to talk. The woman who had spent a lifetime keeping Carl Dean off every stage, who had let the world doubt he existed rather than hand him over, began, after his death, to open up about him more than she ever had while he was alive. She talked about the loneliness. She talked about relearning her days. She said she still felt him with her, daily, in her memories and in her heart, and in the whole life they had built together, and that her faith told her she would see him again, and she believed it all the way down. The secret she had kept so fiercely for so long, she could finally speak about, because the thing that had made it a secret, protecting him, was the one thing she could no longer do. He was past protecting now. All she had left to guard was the memory, and so, gently, she began to share it. She wrote him a song, of course. That is how she has answered every loss of her life, from a dead baby brother to a coat made of rags, with a song. Shortly after he died, she dedicated a song called If You Hadn't Been There to him, a reckoning of just how much of her whole life and career had stood on the quiet foundation of one man who never wanted any credit for it. If he had not been there, in the laundromat, on the farm, on the other end of the deal that let her fly, there is no telling whether any of the rest of it would have happened at all. She had spent 60 years being the famous one, and at the end she was saying, out loud, that the invisible one had been holding up the whole thing. The grief took a toll on her body, the way grief does, especially in someone who had spent her life ignoring her own needs to tend to everyone else's. She had let her health slide while Carl was sick, and then slid further while she mourned him. And by the time she came up for air, her immune system and her digestive system were, in her words, all out of whack, and old troubles like kidney stones came roaring back. She has joked, because she always jokes, that the doctors dig more stones out of her in a year than they pull from the rock quarry back home. The medicines left her dizzy, too dizzy to do the thing she has done her whole life: stand on a stage in high heels and a heavy costume with a guitar and make it look easy. For the first time at 80, she had to step back. She had to cancel things she had never canceled. A big Las Vegas residency, planned and announced and sold, first got pushed back and then, in the spring of 2026, got called off entirely, and she apologized to every ticket holder with the same directness she brings to everything, telling them to go enjoy Vegas anyway and catch her some other time. She skipped the governor's awards. She skipped her own 80th birthday party at the Grand Ole Opry, the stage where a 13-year-old once demanded her first encore. When rumors started that she was dying, she did what she always does. She took the microphone herself and told the truth, that she was not as sick as people were saying, that everything was treatable, that she was not facing anything terminal, that she had just gotten worn down and worn out, grieving over Carl and 100 other little things, and that she needed to rebuild herself, spiritually and emotionally and physically, from the ground up. And even then, even grieving and dizzy and 80 years old and off the stage for the first time in her life, the mountain girl who once promised a laughing graduating class she would be a star would not lie down. She stood up at the opening of Dollywood's 2026 season. In the park, her husband used to visit in secret, and she told the crowd that she was not finished. She had been writing, she said, and thinking and praying and getting ready. Be ready for me, she told them. I ain't done, I ain't near done. She compared herself to an old classic car that, once you restore it, can run better than it ever did new. It was the most Dolly thing she could have said, and it was true in more ways than she let on. She had been restoring herself her whole life, over and over, taking the wreck of some terrible year and rebuilding it into something that ran again. She had done it after the closet, after Larry, after the surgery, after the gun on the stairs, after every grave. Now she was doing it one more time at 80, worn down and worn out, grieving the man who had been her engine and her ground. And she was talking about it the way she talked about everything hard, with a joke and a plan and a stubbornness that would not quit. She admitted she still had healing to do. She said it plainly, no glamour on it, but she said she was on her way. The child who marched up to Johnny Cash and asked for the Opry was still in there, still asking the world for one more encore, still certain she had songs left to sing. She said she thought Carl was still watching over her. She said all was good. But to understand why losing Carl hit the way it did, you have to understand that he was not the first person Dolly Parton had learned to bury quietly, and he would not be the last. All her life behind the sparkle, she had been practicing a private grief the public almost never saw. The woman who put every heartache into a song kept most of the actual funerals to herself, and there had been so many of them. Go back to the beginning of the new century. Her father, Lee, the illiterate horse trader with the quick mind, the man who paid a doctor in cornmeal for the baby who became a legend, died in November of the year 2000 at 79, worn down by strokes. Before he went, he had lived just long enough to see his daughter start something. That must have healed a wound in him he had carried his whole life. She had built the Imagination Library in her home county, and then far beyond it, a program that mailed free books to little children so that no child would grow up like her daddy, shut out of the printed world, made to feel less than for something that was never his fault. The children who got the books took to calling her the Book Lady, which is a title she may love more than any other she owns. Her father, the man who could not read, lived to watch his daughter make sure millions of children could. He was proud, and then he was gone. 3 years later, in December of 2003, she lost Avie Lee, her mother, the singer of the old ballads, the woman who packed her toes with cornmeal and sewed a coat of many colors out of scraps and a Bible story. She was 80. Her final years had been hard on the whole family, hard in the ordinary, wrenching way that the end of a parent's life is hard. When grown children who love each other cannot agree on how to care for a mother who is slipping away and does not want to be managed. There had been a painful business over who should look after Avie Lee's affairs as her health failed. A family split down the middle, most of the children on one side and a couple of them on the other, and their mother herself, resisting the loss of her independence to the last. There was no villain in it. There was only a large family, raised poor and proud and stubborn, each of them certain they were protecting their mother, and none of them able to stop what was coming. It became moot the way these things do. She died, and the argument died with her, and what was left was grief. Dolly has said that for months after she lost her parents, she could not get through Coat of Many Colors without breaking down. The song that had healed the worst day of her childhood turned, for a while, into a wound she could not touch. That is what a song can do. It holds the people you have lost inside it, and every time you open your mouth to sing it, there they are, and there they are gone. She kept singing it anyway. She always kept singing. Then came a loss that cut closer than most, and that she has never wanted to talk about in detail. And we should honor that even while we tell the truth of it. Her niece, Tever, the daughter of her brother Randy, a girl the family called Sweet Tea, died in the spring of 2017 at only 36 years old. The reports said it was a drug overdose, the end of a long and losing fight with addiction that had cost her jobs and custody of her own young son, and finally, her life. Dolly, by the accounts of the time, had tried to help, had reportedly paid for at least one stay in rehab. Tens of thousands of dollars spent trying to pull a girl back from the edge, the way she had once been pulled back from her own edge by a dog on the stairs. It did not work. Sweet Tea slipped away, and the funeral was private, and Dolly, it was said, was too ill to attend. Somewhere in her own memory of the gun and the little Boston Terrier, she knew exactly how close the line was, and how thin, and how some people cross it and never come back. She had been given a second messenger. Her niece was not, and then, one after another, the brothers and sisters she had grown up crammed against for warmth in that two-room cabin began to leave. Floyd, her brother, one of the twins, a songwriter who had written with her, who had a hand in her hit Rockin' Years, died in the winter of 2018 at 61, and the family sang one of his own songs at the service. Randy, her brother, a musician and a performer who had worked at Dollywood alongside her, died in early 2021 at 67, taken by cancer, and she announced it leaning hard on the faith that has held her up her whole life. David, the quiet one, who had lived far from the cameras as a bridge builder, died in late 2024 at 82, and in the summer of 2026, not long after everything else. Denver, a crane operator and farmer who had also stayed out of the light, died at 82 as well. Count them up, and you find that of the 12 children born in that cabin on Locust Ridge, the ones who slept 3 and 4 to a bed, who ate whatever ran through the woods, who wore feed-sack dresses and were rich in the things money cannot buy. The family had thinned by nearly half. Larry at 4 days old, and then Floyd, Randy, David, Denver, and the others, one by one. The poor and proud Parton, children of the Great Smoky Mountains, getting old and going home. Dolly outlived so many of them. She has said that losing a sibling cuts in a way that losing a parent does not. Because a brother or a sister shares the whole length of your life, the beginning of it, the cabin, the cold, the songs, the whole world before you were anybody. When they go, a piece of the beginning goes with them, and there is no getting it back. All of that grief, and the public saw almost none of it. That is the thing to understand. The woman on the magazine covers, the one giggling on the talk shows in the rhinestones and the wig, was burying her father and her mother, and her niece and her brothers. And she did it the way she did everything that mattered, quietly at home, out of the light. The sparkle was not a lie about her sorrow. The sparkle was what she wore over it, the same coat of many colors she had worn to school, insisting through her tears that it was beautiful, refusing to let the world see her as anything less than fine. She had been doing that since she was a little girl. She was very, very good at it, which is why, when Carl died in the spring of 2025, it was not simply the loss of one man. It was the loss of the last person who had been there for all the other losses. He was the one she came home to after every funeral. He was the ground she stood on while the rest of the family thinned, and the world spun, and the lights got heavier to carry. She had grieved so many people in the shelter of that marriage, in the RV and the quiet farmhouse, and the long, comfortable silence of a man who did not need her to perform her pain. And now the shelter itself was gone, and she was standing out in the open with 60 years of grief, and no one left to hold the umbrella. There's something almost disorienting about watching her talk now. For nearly 60 years, the one subject Dolly Parton would not fully open was the one closest to her heart. She would give an interview or anything else. The childhood, the wigs, the surgeries, the business, the jokes, an endless, generous river of Dolly. And somewhere in the middle of it, there would be Carl, mentioned warmly and briefly, and then set gently back down out of reach. She protected him the way she protected the tender things she had learned as a child never to hand over. And now, since he died, that reserve has softened, and she has begun to say the quiet parts out loud. How lonely it is, how the mornings are the hardest, how she still reaches for him, how much of her whole life rested on a foundation the public never saw. The most private thing she owned is becoming, at the end, the thing she most needs to talk about. And once you understand why, you understand the whole woman. So what in the end was Dolly Parton's biggest secret? For 60 years the world tried to guess. Some said it was that Carl Dean did not exist. Some said it was an affair, a hidden lover. The truth behind all that flirting and all those winks, and that famous line about "how do you know I don't?" Some said it was the surgeries, the wigs, the made-up face, the idea that the whole woman was a costume, and there was nothing real underneath. And every one of those guesses had a grain of something in it, and every one of them missed the actual thing. Here is the actual thing. The biggest secret Dolly Parton ever kept was not a fact she was hiding. It was a way of living. The most looked-at woman in America spent her entire life protecting a private world that no camera was ever allowed inside. And she did it on purpose, and she did it out of love, and it started in a coat closet in the dark. Everything else, the hidden husband, the lost children, the affair of the heart, the gun, the tattoos, the funerals nobody saw, all of it lived inside that one secret. She built the brightest, loudest, most visible self in the history of American music, precisely so that behind it she could keep one small room where she got to be a real person, unwatched, ungoverned, hers. Think about the shape of her whole life, and you see it everywhere. A girl who was the fourth of 12, starved for a scrap of attention, learns 2 lessons at the same time, and holds both of them her whole life. The first lesson is be seen, be loud. Be so bright they cannot look away, because being overlooked is a kind of death. The second lesson, learned the same year, in the same childhood, when cruel children shoved her into the dark. For the sin of loving a coat made of rags is, keep the tender thing hidden, guard the real thing, Never again hand the world something precious for it to laugh at. Most people would have to choose between those two lessons. Dolly did not choose. She became both at once. She turned the outside of herself into a spectacle, so she could turn the inside of herself into a sanctuary. The wig was not vanity. The wig was the closet door. Only this time she was holding it shut from the inside, and the darkness she kept in there was not fear anymore. It was everything she loved. It was a paving contractor who looked at her face outside a laundromat. It was an RV and a Taco Bell run and a farm where nobody performed. It was pastel butterflies tattooed over her scars, shown to one man and no one else. It was the grief for a baby brother and a mother and a father and a niece, and the brothers who slept beside her in the cold. She gave the world the shine so she could keep all of that safe. "I may look fake," she said, "but I'm real where it counts." She was telling us the secret the whole time. We just heard a punchline instead of a confession, and the man at the center of it understood this better than anyone because he was the same way. Only he had no stage to hide behind and did not want one. Carl Dean's whole life was the proof of the secret. He refused every camera. He gave up on award shows after a single miserable night. He drove to his own wife's theme park and stood in line and paid full price, rather than be known as Dolly's husband for even one afternoon. He was not cold, and he was not ashamed of her, and he was not a story she invented. He was a man who loved a woman so much that he agreed to disappear so that she could be free, and who loved her so quietly that the world spent 60 years arguing about whether he was real. He was the secret's keeper as much as she was. Two people who understood, without ever having to say it, that the most valuable thing you own is the part of your life no one else gets to see. That is why the strangest thing of all is that she is talking now, after 60 years of guarding him, of letting the whole world doubt him, rather than surrender 1 inch of their privacy. Dolly Parton has finally started to open up about Carl Dean and about the marriage and about the loneliness and about the loss. Some people think that means the secret is over. It is the opposite. She is not breaking the secret. She is doing the only thing she has left. While he was alive, she loved him by protecting his privacy, by keeping him hidden, by refusing to hand him over. Now that he is gone, there is nothing left to protect. Protection is a thing you do for the living. So she loves him the only way that remains. She remembers him out loud. She tells the world at last about the man she spent her life keeping from the world, because telling us is the last way. She has to keep him with her. She has said she still feels him every day, in the things they built and in her own heart, and that her faith tells her she will see him again, and she believes it without a flicker of doubt. She has said the hardest part is not the big grief, but the small business of it, making new plans alone, a supper for one, a road trip with an empty passenger seat. And she has said in the same breath, in the way that has always been hers, that she is not done, that she is rebuilding herself like an old car that runs better once you restore it, that Carl is up there watching, that all is good. Both things are true at once, the way they always were with her, bright on the outside, aching underneath. A woman who buried the love of her life and got up the next morning and put her face back on so that the world would see Dolly Parton, and only Dolly Parton, and never the widow underneath. Go back one last time to that line at the theme park. The ordinary summer morning, the families and the strollers and the sunburns, the tall, quiet man in the ball cap, paying for his own ticket, so happy to be no one at all, walking through the world his wife had built out of a childhood of cornmeal and newspaper walls, and telling not a soul who he was. He never wanted the light. She spent her life making sure he never had to stand in it. And the terrible, tender joke of it is that now, with him gone, the light is all she has of him. She cannot keep him private anymore, because there is no him left to keep. There is only the memory, and the memory lives in the telling, and so she tells it. She met him outside a laundromat when she was 18, with a suitcase full of dirty clothes, and a head full of songs, and a plan to be looked at by the whole world. And she was. The whole world looked. She got everything the girl in the closet ever wanted. The lights, the crowds, the #1 records, the name over the gate. But the one thing she wanted most, in the end, was the one thing the world could never give her back. And it was not fame at all. It was a man who looked at her face instead of her body, on the first morning of her real life, and then agreed out of love to look at her that way for the next 60 years, where nobody else could see. She spent a lifetime being the most seen woman in America. Her biggest secret was the one person she looked at back. And all the looking in the world, all the crowds and the cameras and the lights, she was never again afraid of. Cannot put him back in the passenger seat of the RV, on a back road in Tennessee, on the long way home. So she does the only thing a songwriter can do with a hole that size. She sings about him. She talks about him. She keeps him, the only way that is left to keep anybody, out loud at last, in the light he never wanted, from the one person he ever let all the way in. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.